It is 9:29 p.m. on a Monday night, a Monday that was incredibly eventful for multiple sports. Football, we're going to talk about. Men's basketball, we're going to talk about. Women's basketball, their season ended today. Hard fought game against Indiana. A lot of stuff happening on a Monday in late March, and we are here to break it down just a little bit and to start off what is going to be a week full of content. And we're here to break it down on a Monday night. My name is Jesse Crittenden. I am joined by Brody Lusk, our basketball reporter and recruiting guru. Is guru in your title? It should be.
Yeah, we can add that in.
We should add that in. I like that word. Have you ever seen the movie The Love Guru?
No,
Okay. That might be before your time, maybe. Mike Myers? No?
no.
Oh, okay. Well, that saddens me a little bit. That's okay. Brody, today was, like I said, a long day. Really long for me because we got to attend the media, excuse me, got to attend a 90-minute portion of OU's football practice today. 90 minutes is even longer than it sounds.
Yeah, is that a record? Is that a record?
Yeah. Normally, it's so interesting because normally it's so what it was a little bit different to go from Lincoln Riley to Brent Venables. Actually, a lot different.
Yeah.
Brent Venables has opened up practice and availability and stuff a lot more than Lincoln Riley
Mm.
did. But the last couple of years under Brent, it's been typically anywhere from 2 to 4 open practices that are about 40 minutes long. That's how long we get to watch. So it was interesting because we got 90 minutes, which is like more than double of what we normally get. But it was also interesting because we didn't get to report, media were not allowed to take pictures or video, which was also really interesting.
Yeah.
It was really, really interesting. So it was kind of crazy all the way around.
Yeah, a lot of
Uh,
observations.
Yeah, man, a lot. And I think, I want to preface this by saying that we're gonna have so much football content this week, not only written content, but I know Brandon and Parker are gonna record a pod tomorrow. Brian and I will do the Oklahoma drill on Wednesday. But I kind of just wanted to give a couple of quick observations to people out there, and I kind of put this on the OU Insider VIP board. My main takeaway, Brody, and I know your focus is basketball, but I know you keep up with football too. My main takeaway is that Dion Burks is going to be a dude in that wide receiver group. He's he's going to be a stud. I'm fully confident in saying anybody out there that is in any way not skeptical, but isn't fully bought in, buy your stock right now. I thought it was really interesting. Not only, I mean, because we've heard a lot about him. We got to talk to him a few weeks ago. I did a big profile on him and talked to a bunch of people around him. But I was really curious to see how fast is this guy and how are things kind of shaping out with him early in the spring? And not only is he already taken first team reps as the slot guy replacing Drake Stoops, but he's everywhere, man. He was taking punt return reps, he was taking kick return reps, and he also just his speed and his agility, his quickness really stood out to me. And I mean, I think he's going to be exactly what Oklahoma needs, especially to replace Drake Stoops. But I think I don't know, man. I think and you have an interesting perspective as a guy that isn't covering, so you get to be a little bit more of a fan,
Hmm.
right? Um, I don't know what maybe your perspective on Deion Burks has been, but I'm telling you right now, man, he's going to be a stud. He is.
Yeah, and it's a crowded wide receiver room as well. A lot of talent in there. Was that probably your main takeaway besides Deion Burks? Was there any other, newcomers that, people may not be talking about offensively that did stand out to you?
Yeah, a couple. It just is more of like observations, and you have to remember that in these open practices, there's so much going on, and it's also it's you kind of learn to figure out what like how much stock to put into some stuff and how much to
Mhm.
put into others. I will say that the a lot of the freshmen really stood out to me, just their size. Guys like Jaden Jackson and David Stone. Danny Okoye is, I mean, we got to see him a couple weeks ago, but that dude is really big, does not look like a freshman at all. But I think as far as anyone that really stood out to me, the other guy was Bauer Sharp at tight end. Again, that tight end room has been a big discussion because obviously you're using Austin Stogner from last year, and I think there was a lot of fan criticisms about that tight end position as a whole. There wasn't a ton of depth there. So I was kind of curious in this tight end room that has kind of a lot of different guys in it, like Devon Mitchell as a freshman and Josh Fanuel, who saw some snaps last year. I mean, Bauer Sharp, I think, is going to be the tight end one. And I think he was more impressed. I think he was most impressive just in terms of he's got size. He's 6'4". He looks really big out on the field. But his speed really, really stood out to me. And also it was pretty clear right away because you get to practice and after a few minutes of warmups, they break into individual drills usually, and that's what they did today. And who's at the front of the line with Joe John Finley to start every individual drill with the tight ends? It's Bauer Sharp. And I think that's going to surprise some people because, I mean, he was an FCS player last year. He's coming from Southeastern Louisiana or Louisiana University. So I think he was highly touted in the portal, but I don't think got a lot of fanfare.
Mhm.
But I actually talked to some of the other reporters from different outlets there, and I think everybody was agreeing that actually, if anybody stood out the most, it was Bauer Sharp. And it was really cool to see. There were a couple of times during drills, I really watched the tight end position group a lot. There were a lot of times where after he's going through a rep, and then the second and third guys behind him every time, it was Josh Fanwell and then Devon Mitchell, which I think is also encouraging for fans, especially the Devon Mitchell part of it. But it was really cool to see all the tight ends go through, and Bauer would go through, everybody else would go through. And then a couple of times he pulled Devon Mitchell off to the side to kind of, help
Mhm.
with technique, stuff like that. Him and Fanwell were really talking about different stuff. I think that's almost like we focus on the big picture
Yeah.
part of practices, but almost it's kind of sometimes the smaller moments. And Bauer really stood out to me, not only just because of everything he was doing on the field, but all the little stuff he was doing off to the side. And I think that's an encouraging thing for fans because I mean I think he's a guy that's already come in and established himself like he's been on the team the entire time. And I don't know, man, you probably agree with me that I think outside of the offensive line, that tight end group has been a big question mark. And there's still some things to work out, but Bauer really stood out to me, man. He really did.
Hey, that's Brian Clinton's guy. Bauer Sharp.
Yes, it is.
That's his guy.
Yes, it is. I should have mentioned that. Brian actually mentioned it yesterday in our group chat, and then showing up to
Yeah.
because Brian, it was me, Brian, and Brandon there today, and Brian said, I think I want to see Bauer Sharp more than anybody." He said that, and then like within 10 minutes, everybody's talking about Bauer Sharp on the sidelines, all the reporters, everything. So shout out to Brian for that. But yeah, man. Again, it's the spring. It's hard to know. Like this is a hype season. It's
Mhm.
hype
Yeah.
season. I would be hyped about that guy if I was a fan. I really would. I think he's going to play a lot. I do.
Is there anyone you'd be hyped about defensively after seeing practice, or just didn't see a whole lot that really jumped off the charts to you?
Yeah, man. I think I mean there was a lot of usual suspects. It was great to see Justin Harrington not only out on the field but practicing. Brent Venables kind of made it sound like him and Angelo Anthony weren't really going to come back till the summer, but
Mhm.
Justin Harrington's out on the field in pads and looked really good. We actually got to talk to him after practice, which was great, and I'll have more about that later. And so the linebacker group looked really interesting with Danny Stutzman and Jaron Kanek and Kip Lewis were getting about the same amount of reps. So I think that's going to be a battle that continues. I think the main guy for me, man, was Des Malone at cornerback. That guy, not only his size and his speed, but he's just a competitive dude, man. And when we got to practice, it was actually a bit interesting. They did warm ups, they did their usual warm ups, And then they went into like a wide receiver versus safety drill that everybody's involved in. Like the wide receiver, it's a one-on-one wide receiver safety drill. And everybody else is like in a semicircle around, just watching the reps go through. The best battle by far was Jaden Gibson and Des Malone. That was the best battle by far. Two kind of taller dudes, really athletic, going for it. And Des Malone won the first battle, or he won the battle in that drill. And then in like the 7-on-7 drills later, they went at it. They went at it again, and Jaden Gibson won that battle. So it was really interesting to see kind of that
Yeah.
clash. But Des Malone, man, he's a guy I'm guilty of not talking a whole lot about because in my head, the secondary group is, I don't want to say there's not question marks, but there's a decent idea of what that rotation is going to look like. Des, Des Malone was maybe the guy that I wasn't thinking a whole lot about going into practice that I'm now thinking more about, I think, to answer your question.
Yeah, certainly, him and Jaden Gibson, that's got to be a moment where you're really wishing you could take out your, camera and video that,
Oh,
type
yeah.
of drill.
That's a really good, yeah, that was one of those things like, man, if you had posted that clip, especially in that first one-on-one of them going at it, that would have been talked about. Not only because I think the not only just because it was exciting, but I think because of the competitiveness of both those guys. That's what gets people fired up. That's what gets media fired up. That's what gets fans fired up. So I would say Des Malone, and then I think the other guy is Ashton Sanders on that defensive line. He was actually when they split off into individual drills. It was so I was actually near the defensive tackle. So it's Todd Bates and everybody's lining up, and it's one of those things where a lot of times whoever is like the first person going through each drill typically is your starter, right? And most of the time, not
Mhm.
all the time, so it's hard to know how much stock to put into it, but Ashton Sanders was going first in those drills, and I thought that was really interesting, and he looked really good too. So I think that almost goes to my bigger question of like, I think there's a lot of position groups that are established and you kind of know what the rotation is going to look like. But what about these second year guys? Ashton
Yeah.
Sanders, PJ Adebawore, Makari Vickers, Josiah Wagner, um,
Lewis Carter.
those, yeah, Lewis Carter, Samuel Omasigo. Samuel
Mhm.
Omasigo was working out a lot at Cheetah, which I thought was really interesting. That's the other thing. That's the last thing I'm going to mention is that the secondary and how much everybody was moving around was really interesting. Like Woody Washington was going everywhere. Corner, nickel, cheetah. He was playing some cheetah today. And I had heard that a little bit,
Mhm.
but actually watching it was really interesting. But yeah, so I think all that is to say, I actually think there's a lot of different ways, particularly defensively. There's a lot of ways that those depth charts could go. And I think they're trying out a lot of different stuff. I really do. But I don't know. You mentioned Lewis Carter. Are there any second year guys like in your head, just as kind of a guy that's able to step back a little bit that you're excited about?
Yeah, those are the first ones that come to mind, but you also got to think about a guy like Jacoby Johnson,
Yeah.
incredibly talented, but also in a, very, competitive position group. That's a deep position group. You mentioned Des Malone, but aren't they a little bit banged up in the secondary right now, which does kind of allow them to move some guys like Woody Washington around and get extra reps to those second year guys like a Jacoby Johnson or a Josiah Wagner?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. So Billy Bowman didn't participate much in practice today. Now I think he's fine, and we talked to him afterwards. But he was kind of more of a coach on the field today. He wasn't really
Mhm.
going through drills. Gentry Williams also wasn't going through drills. So I think that made it interesting, especially in that cornerback room, because I thought Kanai Walker uh, made a strong statement today. Kendall Dolby looked really good. Some of those other young cornerbacks in that room. Yeah, man. I actually think, I mean, again, like you think of safety and it's Billy Bowman and probably Peyton Bowen, right? And then cornerback, you think Woody Washington and Gentry
Mhm.
Williams. Linebacker, you think Danny Stutzman and either Kip Lewis or
Yeah.
Canick. And, either at Cheetah, maybe it's Deshaun McCullough or Justin Harrington. I actually think there's going to be some battles for those spots. And if nothing else, I think whoever is the second string and third string guys is actually going to be a real battle, maybe more so this year than at any point in recent memory. I really do. I think so.
Well, that's what you want.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you want. Have a lot of guys that can compete.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would just say, there's so much. Look, 90 minutes is so
Mm-hmm.
much to break down. So I think ultimately those were the things that really stood out to me. I'll mention a couple of other things real quick. Casey Thompson was out on the field. So I thought that was interesting. Wasn't sure how involved he was going to be. So that was interesting. And then a lot of people are going to ask about the offensive line.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just be honest, there wasn't a ton to glean from today. Not only was the offensive line kind of tucked away, kind of in the back corner where it was hard to really get a good look at everything that was going on, but it was pretty clear a lot of times in the individual drills, they were working out in two separate groups. And the guys that you think or you have an idea of who are going to start were kind of mixed up, like mixed around. So my biggest takeaway from all that was that I think not only is it still a big work in progress, but I think Bill Bedenbaugh is really trying to figure out what combinations
Mm-hmm.
specifically work together. So I think that's going to be a main thing. But yeah, man, there's so much to break down. And so I think tying all that up, there's going to be so much content over on the website the next few days for me, Brian, and Brandon, who were there today. We might get another open practice on Wednesday. We'll get more player availability certainly on Wednesday. And again, we're going to have more videos here on the OU Insider YouTube channel. So, I would encourage people to stick around and keep, because it's a big week for football. But Brody, you've heard me talk enough about football for now, and there's going to be plenty of football content this week. You on our OU Insider YouTube channel, or sorry, not our YouTube channel, on OUinsider.com, put out some transfer portal info for the
Mm-hmm.
OU men's team. But before we get to that, let's talk about the biggest thing,
Yeah.
which is that Otega Owe is officially in the portal. Now, I think we've expected that for some time. I think you specifically have expected that for some time. But was there anything surprising about the announcement coming today? And what was your overall thoughts once it became officially official he was in the portal?
Yeah, nothing surprising about it coming today. As you mentioned, this was one that we've expected for a bit now. I heard that they kind of wanted a lot of the players that were entering the portal wanted to wait until that first weekend of the NCAA tournament was over. Hence why you see the announcement come today after all those games got finished up. But yeah, I think this is one where it's probably best for both sides. Owe started out really, he started out playing really well. And I think we both knew that that wasn't going to keep up, but he did, I think he went from averaging 15 points to 8 points in conference play. Had some good moments. You think about that USC tip in that he had. And then in conference play, he just really struggled. He ended up, not starting anymore, which was in part due to how he was playing, but also in part due to, how well Rivaldo Soares was playing. But I think I'm interested to see where Otega Owe ends up. I would imagine it's going to be somewhere back north, back closer to home. And one thing is we're not going to hear every broadcast that his brother plays in the NFL anymore, which is a little bit disappointing. I missed that, but yeah, I think it was one that we expected. There'll be a few more. I'd imagine pretty soon. But yeah, best of luck to Owe wherever he ends up. But I think this one is best for both sides.
Yeah, I agree. I think ultimately, and I've had some time to expect it and process it. I think I honestly, and I think I said this in my tweet. It's not surprising that it entered the portal, but I do think it's a disappointing end
Yeah.
to Otega's tenure with Oklahoma, because you think about 2 seasons ago and how tough that season was down the stretch, and I
Mm-hmm.
think the thought process was, if you can keep Otega and Los, if you
Yeah.
can keep those guys, you build around those
Mm-hmm.
guys, that's a reason for optimism. Then he had this great start to the year, and then got into conference play, and it didn't look very good. And I don't think he's necessarily even really to blame for that. I think it was just I don't think his style and what he's good at matched what Porter Moser and this coaching staff wants to do. To me, there's a lot of ways we could talk about it, but like to me, ultimately, this is just it's really tough that it didn't work out. Right.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that's the best way to put it.
Yeah. I think anytime you have someone who, you dub as like your building block going into the next season, and then like after that season they're gone, that's tough because you expected, hey, these are the two guys that are going to be the future of this program. But yeah, I think schematically it wasn't the greatest fit, which is also why I think this is something that was best for both sides.
Now, barring something miraculous, OU can officially move forward knowing he's not going to
Mm-hmm.
be on the roster.
Yeah.
What about the rest of this roster? And I know there's
Mm-hmm.
still a lot of stuff to work out. There's a lot of stuff behind the scenes, but in terms of from a fan's perspective, what's the expectation for the
Yeah.
next few days? Because I don't think either of us and you would certainly know, don't expect this to be the only portal entry. But
Mm-hmm.
what is the rest of this current roster who can return? What is the feel you're getting? What does the next few days look like?
Yeah, so I would expect, I would say probably a good expectation to have is probably 2 to 3 more portal entries, or anything around that number. Look, Jalen Moore, we mentioned this, when we kind of did our big video recapping the season, looking towards what's next. Jalen Moore, we both said has to be priority number one, and he is priority number one. So, Oklahoma is going to do, they know that you have to keep Jalen Moore. And this is a big offseason for Porter Moser, biggest one yet, because as we both mentioned, you got to find a way to make the tournament. So, with this current roster, I think to me, the expectation is you're going to lose a few more guys, but you got to keep Jalen Moore. That's where I'm at. And JV McCollum too. He's another one where it would be big to bring him back.
You mentioned a couple of guys in the article you published today
Yeah.
over at OUinsider.com that are, a couple of the biggest targets so far. And you mentioned one specifically,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a name that's been out there for a
Yeah.
while, and that's obviously Brandon Garrison from Oklahoma State. So don't think it was very surprising that he entered the portal in the first place. Don't think it's a big surprise that a lot of schools reached out to him,
Mm-hmm.
despite there being a do not call tag on his
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
his
What
portal
does that even
entry.
mean now?
It's a
It's fake.
suggestion.
It's
It's
fake.
not a law.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a law. But Brody, how big would it be for Oklahoma to land him? And do you have, I guess, and again, I know there's behind the scenes stuff to
Yeah.
work out, but do you expect this everything with Garrison? Do you think this is something that could drag on, or do you think there's a possibility that within the next few days this could be resolved?
Look, Garrison's he's doing the portal the right way, in my opinion. So he entered the portal after Mike Boynton was fired. And that doesn't rule out a return to Oklahoma State, but the longer they take to hire a head coach, which they seem to be striking out every time they want to hire someone, that bodes well for him to not return to Oklahoma State. So I don't expect this one to be over pretty quick. I think this one is one that actually might drag out for a little bit. Of course, the big one will drag out, the longest, but I think there's two schools that stand out, if he weren't to return to Oklahoma State, and that's Oklahoma and Kansas. And the first thing that anyone's gonna think of when they think of Kansas and what their roster is gonna look like, you think of, oh well, they have Hunter Dickinson back next year. They have a 5-star number one, center coming in, Florida doing good, and they can bring back KJ Adams. So they'll have a crowded front court if all those guys were to return. And then you have Oklahoma, where Brandon Garrison would be the guy at the center position. He'd actually be the guy they have lacked for a very long time. And I know a lot of people aren't going to get their hopes up on Garrison because Oklahoma really hasn't. I think it's fair to say they have not landed a player like him in a very long time. But one thing to take into consideration is how close. Like he grew up in Oklahoma City, so that will play a factor into this recruitment. But again, I think this is one that will drag out for quite a bit.
Yeah, and it's, man, you mentioned Oklahoma State coaching search. Good
Yeah,
Lord, man. What are they doing? What's happening?
that is a great question because it seems like every single time they have a name, like whether that be Darian DeVries, and I think everyone knew Darian DeVries was not going to take Oklahoma State when he had better options. Then they had Danny Sprinkle. He's not taking it. Like, okay, you might just have
Yeah.
to hire Doug Gottlieb. I don't know. Um, they're getting close to that point. I mean, like
Yeah.
they're they're going low. But there's still some good names out there for them, like a Steve Lutz at Western Kentucky or a Bryce Drew. I think what it's going to come down to is who do they hire and what does Brandon Garrison think of that coach, and can that coach resonate with Brandon Garrison and ultimately make a pitch good enough to bring him back out of the portal. And also, I don't think it's no question that Oklahoma State didn't really have any NIL money last season. That was one of the reasons why their roster was the way it was. So maybe they, commit more to NIL. I'm not sure, but it's definitely going to be interesting. And, it seems like every day it just keeps dragging out and they keep missing and they keep missing. And I have a feeling they might keep missing a little bit longer. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, and the other name you mentioned in your article was Jordan Ivy Curry
Mm-hmm.
from UTSA, a point guard that was pretty impressive this past season. Averaged over 17 a game and was a pretty good 3-point shooter. Shot almost 39%. You mentioned a couple of things in that article, and obviously he's on OU's radar. But what's OU's pitch to him? Because especially because you've still, for now, got a couple of
Mm-hmm.
starting level guards on the roster, and there's still a lot of things in flux. But what's the pitch to him, and how high of a priority is he for Oklahoma?
That's a good question. I actually am going to put a note out about this here soon, right after we get off this, about priority list in the guard wise. I don't, he's not priority one, but actually as of right now, I would consider him priority one. But Oklahoma, they're going to look at multiple different options guard wise. But they are going to conduct a Zoom interview with Jordan Ivy Curry. That is one of the things I mentioned in that article I put out. So their pitch to him, man, they need a scorer who can be the guy. Look, Jordan Ivy Curry scored 38 against FAU. That's the tournament team. He can fill it up. And so I think Oklahoma right now they're looking for a scorer. They're looking for someone who we mentioned it. They need someone who's going to go win them a game. And so, he's a guy, he's heard from a lot of different SEC schools too. And I think, I'm curious to know what their pitch will be as well. I think you could see him potentially be a type of sixth man guy. But also he could be the guy that starts or, is your guy. So it'll be interesting. And look, today there was just a lot more portal names in the portal now. You have a lot to work with. Whereas last week, there wasn't really much. And that's why in that article right now on the list, I'll update it every single time. Members will be able to see that. But there was only two names because those are really the only two that stand out right now. So, I'm interested to see what that looks like with Jordan Ivy Curry type, priority wise in a couple of days. But right now, he's really the only guard they're really targeting.
How expansive? I mean, I guess it's kind of a two-part question.
Yeah.
How expansive do you think OU's target list is going to be, and or transfer portal target
Yeah, yeah,
list
yeah.
is going to be, and how tied is it to any potential portal, God, not porter, portal entries for Oklahoma? Like, is Oklahoma kind of operating almost unrelated to what happens on their own roster, or is things that could happen on the roster in the next few days, is that going to have an impact on how
Yeah.
expansive their list is?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, they see the Oklahoma has contacted type of things, and that doesn't at all mean, they're targeting someone. So, Oklahoma has been one of the teams that they're not really targeting an extensive amount of people, and it's just kind of been they know which guys they like, and those are the guys they're going to pursue. Because Brandon Garrison has been one of two centers who they've reached out to, which I think anyone can use that to tell, hey, that means they like this guy and they're going to pursue him. So and it does, your second part of this question, it does tie into it as far as who may leave, but there's also some needs that they need to fill that they're going to fill that need regardless of who's coming back. I think depending on who they lose in the portal, they might have to take a couple extra different, maybe an extra guard or maybe an extra big, just depending on who leaves. But they know they need another scoring guard, and they know they probably need another guy who can do quite a bit. They need a big man. And so I think there's certain things that they're looking for that aren't tied into that, but there is also certain things where you're like, okay, depending on who leaves, this is what we need.
Any names that came out today
Yeah.
or here recently that even what either OU has interest in them or you think is a really interesting name that it would make sense for OU to get involved with?
Yeah. So to answer both those questions, the first name that came out today is South Dakota State transfer William Kyle the third. Actually about to publish a little note on him, after we hop on this. But he led college basketball in dunks, and he was, the Summit League Defensive Player of the Year. And his best friend is Caden Helms on the football team. So, but not best friend, but close friend. They're close friends, been close friends since middle school. He just entered the portal today, so obviously can't report that, he hasn't been in contact with OU yet, but he's one that I personally am expecting Oklahoma to contact / be involved with. And, there will be the usual suspects when you have a Nebraska native enter the portal. Creighton will probably be involved. Nebraska will probably be involved, but he's a highly touted player that I would expect to get quite a bit of interest also from Oklahoma as well. And then one name I'm monitoring right now, not enough on him to call him, a target yet. That's Kevin Overton, the Drake transfer from Oklahoma City. He started 35 games for a tournament team as a true freshman. And, he's a 3-point shooter, lefty. And again, it's just impressive to see someone like Drake. I know a lot of people are going to look at Drake and say, Drake was a good team. And to do that as a true freshman is impressive. And he just entered today. And I think, Oklahoma has a similar need to kind of what he would fill. But again, it's hard to really dub someone as a target when they've just been in for one day. So he's someone I think you might, there's a chance you'll see some coming notes on him, on the board in a couple of days. But definitely him and William Kyle III were the two most notable names to me that entered the portal today.
That's good stuff. The Kevin Overton thing would be particularly interesting because I actually covered when he played for Norman North.
Yeah.
I was at the Norman Transcript as the sports editor, and I covered them that season. So that would, for personally,
yeah,
that would be interesting. And I mean, he's got some good size. He's 6'3", and he impressed me at Norman North. He did.
Yeah,
And I think he did some good stuff this last year.
Yeah, I like a guy who can shoot that's left-handed.
Yeah, right. Well, Brody, I mean, I think both football and basketball, we've kind of just touched the surface. I think there's so much other stuff that we have dived into, that we're going to dive into, and we're going to continue to do that here on the OU Insider YouTube channel, and of course over at ouinsider.com and the VIP board. Anybody here that's not liking or subscribing to this YouTube channel, you absolutely should. If you're not a VIP member over at ouinsider.com, you absolutely should be. These next few days, basketball transfer portal, spring football practices, notes, interviews, all that stuff is going to be all kinds of stuff you're not going to want to miss. So we started at 9:29. It is now 10:02 on a Monday night. Hope you guys out there enjoyed some basketball and football content. Make sure to stay right here with OU Insider over the next few days to get some more. Till then, see you next time.